Afternoon to all present in the today's virtual platform. Wish you all a very happy and prosperous New Year 2021. Respected resource person on the occasion, CMA Thomas Matthew sir, Managing Director cum CEO, Odisha Capital Market Enterprise Limited. CMA Dr. S.K. Gupta sir, Managing Director RBO, the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. Professor Dr. P.P. Mathur sir, Vice Chancellor Birla Global University. Professor Dr. B.K. Das sir, Register Birla Global University. Professor Dr. S. Maharana sir, Dean Birla School of Commerce, Birla Global University. Neha Joshi Madam, Assistant Professor Accounting and Finance and Program Coordinator, Birla School of Commerce, and other faculties and staffs of Birla Global University joined with us. CMA Mukesh Chube, Chairman, CMA Ajay Kumar Samal, Secretary of the chapter. Along with dignitaries from our institute have joined, Dr. CMA CS and Dr. S.C. Mahathi sir, the President of the Institute 2013 and 14, CMA Niranjan Mishra sir, past Chairman of Chapter and EIRC, CMA S.P. Padi sir, past Chairman and EIRC, esteemed members and stakeholders, my dear beloved students of Birla Global University, Institute of Cost Accountants of India, and students of other colleges and university present in this platform. I, CMA Saktidhar Singh, Chairman PD Committee of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, Bhubaneswar Chapter, warmly welcome you all to the today's webinar on financial sector reforms and a resurgent Indian economy. Basically, deliberation will be held on capital market and investor behavior and insolvency and bankruptcy code, a panacea to lenders. We have organized so many seminars in association with various colleges and university, but this is the first time we are organizing the webinar in association with Birla University, and I must congratulate for their initiation and support. This sort of support and cooperation will continue in future. My sincere thanks to CMA CS Dr. S.C. Mahathi sir, President ICAI 2013-14, and S. Maharana sir for taking initiation, and CMA S.P. Padi sir, past Chairman of Bhubaneswar Chapter and EIRC, for suggesting the relevant topics suitable for both professional and academician. Today we have with us most renowned and learned personalities, CMA Thomas Matthew sir and CMA Dr. S.K. Gupta sir, who will deliver on the topic. Hope this will be a good learning session for all of us. On behalf of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, Bhubaneswar Chapter, I convey my heartfelt thanks and profound gratitude to CMA Matthew sir and CMA Dr. S.K. Gupta sir for acceptance of our invitation. Also convey my sincere gratitude to P.P. Mathur sir, B.K. Das sir, Maharana sir, and Joshi madam for association to conduct this webinar. Thank you all once again. For information of the dignitaries and students, I am just highlighting about the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. The Institute of Cost Accountants of India, erstwhile the Institute of Cost and Works Accountants of India, is a statutory body established under an Act of Parliament for regulation of the profession of cost and management accountancy in India in the year 1959. The institute functions directly under the administrative control of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India, to discharge its responsibility in an effective manner. The institute is a member of the International Federation of Accountants (IFAC) and the Confederation of Asian and Pacific Accountants (SAPA) and South Asian Federation of Accountants (SAPA). It is the largest management accounting body in Asia and second largest management accounting body in the globe. It has contributed substantially for the growth of industrial and economic climate of this country. The main mission of the institute is to drive the enterprises globally by creating value to stakeholders in the socio-economic context through competencies drawn from the integration of strategy, management, and accounting. Its headquarters situated at Kolkata with Delhi office and 4 regional councils, more than 100 chapters and 3 centers of excellence spread all over India and 9 overseas centers. There are more than 80,000 cost and management accountants members, both in employment and practice, about 5 lakh students pursuing this CMA course. The ICAI Bhubaneswar chapter is one of the vibrant and best chapter in India and nodal agency of the Institute for imparting professional education and training in the state of Odisha since 1969. About Bhubaneswar chapter and its activities will be highlighted by our chairman CMA Mukesh Chubey. Now, without taking much time, I would like to request Neha Madam to introduce our today's resource person and guest and moderate the session. Over to Neha Madam. Jai Jagannath.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, sir. At the outset, I, on behalf of Birla Global University, would like to express my gratitude to the Institute of Cost Accountants of India and all the dignitaries from its Bhubaneswar chapter for giving us this opportunity and collaborating with Birla Global University in organizing the first very webinar on the topic Financial Sector Reform and Research in Indian Economy. I, Neha Joshi, Assistant Professor, Birla School of Commerce, Birla Global University, once again extend a warm welcome to all the dignitaries and the participants in today's session. The COVID-19 pandemic is one of the few episodes in the record of history where humanity faces a common existential crisis. Within 4 months, the virus spread all across the world, just not, harming the health and well-being of individual, but also the social and economic networks. History of mankind has been witnessing that any crisis had led to opportunity for radical reforms, impelled realigning our priorities and tweaking policies in pursuit of greater common goods. Taking inspiration from President Franklin Roosevelt New Deal, a series of reforms that were enacted during the year 1933 and 1939 that lifted United States from the Great Depression, which focuses on three main R's: relief for the vulnerable, recovery for the economy, and reforms of the financial sector. We have this webinar today designed. And to enlighten more on us on these pressing issues, we have pool of intellects gracing today's session. From Birla Global University, we have with us our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. P.P. Mathur, Revered Registrar, Birla Global University, Professor Dr. B.K. Das, and our esteemed Dean, Birla School of Commerce, Professor Dr. Samson Maharana. We are highly grateful for your presence, sir. We have the privilege to have with us CMA Thomas Matthews, Managing Director, Odisha Capital Market Limited, and CMA CS Dr. S.K. Gupta, Managing Director, ROV, the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, as our resource person for today's deliberation. Welcome, sir. We are also equally fortunate to have the dignitaries from Institute of Cost Accountants of India, CMA Mukesh Chaubey, Chairman ICAI Bhubaneswar Chapter, and CMA Shaktidhar Singh, Chairman PD Committee ICAI Bhubaneswar Chapter. I extend a warm welcome to all our dignitaries. Now, I would like to take the opportunity to invite our respected Dean, Birla School of Commerce, Professor Dr. Samson Maharana, to deliver his address. Before joining Birla Global University, Professor Maharana has retired as Professor, Head and Dean, PG Department of Commerce, Utkal University. Sir holds his FPM from prestigious IIM Ahmedabad and has been the member of 5th State Finance Commission and is independent director of several state-level PSUs. Sir, please.
Thank you, Professor Neha Joshi. Good afternoon, everybody. Our Vice Chancellor, Professor P.P. Mathur, our Registrar, Professor B.K. Das, the two eminent speakers of today, Dr. S.K. Gupta, and my good friend, Professor Thomas Matthew, the chairman of the Bhubaneswar chapter of ICAI, Mr. Mukesh Chaubey, and Mr. CMA Shaktidhar Singh, who has become a very good friend of us. And I must also take the name of CMA Suresh Chandra Mahanti and CMA Siva Prasad Padi. Both of them are present here. This is a great day for Birla School of Commerce of Birla Global University. We are having collaborative event in collaboration with ICAI. This particular department, which was set up in the year 2016 and 17, we are a growing Department of Commerce, and we are offering both BCom and MCom courses, having students from different states of India. We have entered into a collaboration with Institute of Company Secretary of India. We are also going to enter into a collaboration with the help of Mr. Singh and Mr. Chobe with Institute of Cost Accounts of India, and we'll also enter into a collaboration with Chartered Accountant Institute. So all the three institutes, statutory institute, will have collaboration, because many of our students, they are pursuing professional courses, cost accounting, company secretary, and also chartered accountants. We are so happy today that we have selected a topic which is so important at the present juncture. Maybe in another 2 days' time, our finance minister will be presenting the Union Budget 2021 at a time. She says that it will be the best budget in 100 years. We know that she is facing a very serious challenge of mobilizing additional resources to meet the increasing funding requirement of some of the pressing sectors of the economy, including healthcare, defense, etc. In the ever background, the topic that we have selected for today's webinar, which comes under the financial sector reform, both are very closely related. We need to generate adequate resources, and resources can be generated when your primary sector, that capital market, is very efficient. And secondly, when we find that billions of dollars are blocked, billions of rupees are blocked in the non-performing asset, and all the steps taken by the government during the last so many years were all very limited, basically starting from DRT, OTS or surface, etc. Then government came out with this IBC. And over a period of time, last 3 to 4 years, they are doing a wonderful job. There are a lot of intervention from the court, etc. But every time they are trying to remodify, reorient their strategy. And today we have a very eminent person, and we are all waiting very eagerly to listen to him, because this is a new institute, and they are doing a wonderful job. Even though in many countries of the world, they have very systematic process of declaring a company bankrupt and then realizing asset. But in India, this is what the government, and should be a learning lesson for all our students and teachers, because the efficiency and strength of the financial system depend on contractual enforcement. If the borrowers do not pay the dues in time and take the lender into court of law, and the matter lingers for years together, that is not a good sign. So this is a case where this entire things will be resolved with the consent or agreement of all the stakeholders, including shareholders, including management, lenders, bankers, etc. I once again thank the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, and we are eagerly waiting to listen to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for briefly introducing us to today's topic. We have with us CMA Mukesh Chobe, present chairman of Institute of Cost Accountants of India, Bhubaneswar chapter. Sir is a fellow member of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. He is also a renowned entrepreneur, along with his rich and diversified industrial and practice experience for more than 15 years. I would now request CMA Mukesh Chobe to address the session. Sir.
Thank you, Neha madam. A very good afternoon to all. At the outset, मैं आपके स्वस्थ और सुरक्षित जीवन के लिए सर्वशक्तिमान से प्रार्थना करता हूँ, and wish you all a happy new year 2021. I convey my sincere thanks and deep gratitude to CMA Thomas Matthew sir and Dr. S.K. Gupta sir for accepting our invitation. Also, I convey my thanks to the authorities of Birla Global University, Dr. Mathur sir, Dr. Mahana sir, Dr. Das sir, Professor Neha madam, CMA S.C. Mohanty sir, CMA S.P. Bhadi sir, CMA Niranjan Mishra sir, CMA Niramani sir, Damodar Mishra sir, and others for the association to make the event a gala success, where professionals, academicians, and students are assembled. It's really a memorable day for all of us. Chairman PD Committee of our chapter, CMA Shakdeo Singh Sir, Secretary of the chapter, CMA Ajay Kumar Samal, all professional colleagues in the managing committee, esteemed CMA members, and my dear beloved CMA students and other students. Last year, as humanity almost came to a halt in the face of calamity of gigantic proportions, there were miracles of a revitalizing Mother Nature which taught humanity a hard lesson, that the small is not accident but complementary to a big. Accordingly, we have not stopped, but developed a digital mode of learning and teaching methodology through webinars, webinars, online classes, etc. As told by Shakdeo Singh Sir, it's my proud privilege to highlight in brief about Bhubaneswar chapter and its activities. Bhubaneswar chapter is one of the best chapter in Pan India and providing CMA education to the students and professional services to the members and stakeholders since 1969. At present, we have around 750 members and more than 1,500 students are being enrolled in CMA course every year. In each year, this chapter produces more than 100 qualified CMAs and more than 200 semi-qualified students. This is the only chapter in Pan India who have received Brand Building Award in the year 2018 for conducting maximum number of visibility and branding activities for CMA members and stakeholders. This chapter received Best Chapter Award consecutively 22nd time for commendable performances in all spheres of activities for betterment of the students, members, and stakeholders. This chapter is famous for its state-of-art facilities like chapter has its own building at Napoli, Bhubaneswar, our own website and mobile app, our own computer lab and e-library. We have around 100 professional guest faculties who guide the students for excelling in their examination, and different other facilities are also there for the students, for the final and semi-qualified students. Dear student, I would also like to highlight about career prospective in CMA course. You can go for job, start your career as at a managerial level in finance, and end with CFO, Director of Finance, CEO, MD, CMD, like that, etc. Your bright example today, resource person, CMA Thomas Matthew sir, and CMA Dr. S.A. Gupta sir. You can go for practice, can do cost audit, GST audit, internal audit, content audit, etc. and able to earn till your last breath. You can be a consultant. Also, you can be a good entrepreneur by utilizing knowledge gained from this course. Regarding the topic today, which is going to be very interesting with the presence of our learned resource persons. Thanking you all. Jai Jagannath.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for making this collaboration of professional and academia possible, and I hope this association goes a long way. We are fortunate to have with us our revered Registrar, Birla Global University, Professor Dr. B.K. Das. Sir retired as a General Manager, UCO Bank before joining academics. Dr. Das is a PhD in economics. He joined BIMTech Greater Noida in the year 2009 as a professor in banking and financial services. He is a certified associate of Indian Institute of Bankers, and sir has also worked with the Nobel laureate Professor Yunus under UNDP project. His contribution as banker to financial inclusion and SME is significant and palpable. With this, I would request Professor Dr. B.K. Das, Registrar, Birla Global University, to deliver his address.
Thank you, Professor Neha. Good afternoon to all of you, and also a very happy new year. And before I say, I must mention that my Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Mathur, my colleague, Professor Maharana, and other faculty colleagues from the School of Commerce who have tried their best to have more and more interaction through webinar, and this is outcome of one such effort. And I'm very grateful to the functionaries of the Institute, Mr. Mukesh Chaubey, Chairman of the Bhubaneswar chapter, then our Dr. S.K. Gupta, Managing Director, RVO, the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, and of course, Sri Thomas Matthew, who is a well-known figure in Odisha, and others from the Institute who are
present here, my dear students who are watching this, scholars, and other ladies and gentlemen. This is a wonderful topic picked up by the joint effort of Professor Maharana and member of the institute. I compliment them. Before I come to the topic, I would like to say something about this university also. This is one of the youngest university created by the Act of the Government of Odisha, Birla Global University Act of 2015. We have right now 5 schools: School of Management, School of Commerce, School of Communication, Economics, School of Law, like that we have, and we have planned to open many more schools. In fact, under the Act, we can go for any school, including medical and engineering. And within this few years, we have been noted by the educational community and the scholars and the students throughout the country, and we have received students from almost every state in India. And we are sure that in coming years, we'll rise to the occasion to become really global in character by attracting the foreign students also. We have already collaboration with 5 international level universities, and the number will be growing. With that, I'll come to the topic. Today, we are talking about the financial sector reforms. And as an ex-banker, I'll restrict my talk to the the reforms in the banking sector, which I have witnessed during my career spanning over 37 years in banking. I'll say I joined the bank as a provisioning officer in 1971, the first batch after nationalization. The banks, private banks were nationalized in 1969 by an ordinance, and this was whether it's a political decision or a economic decision, but officially it was a economic decision. The resources of the country were concentrated with the private hands. They were islands of luxury and islands of poverty. So to bridge that, the government thought that the resources should be in their hand to undertake economic development of the country. And that was a right decision in the sense that that was required, because all these financial resources should be utilized for the rapid economic development of the country. That worked to some extent as per the plan, but all of us know that gradually the public sector banks became the instrument of political, this by different parties. I don't want to say any party, but it happened that way. And very popular measures were announced by various governments, which were more political driven than economic driven. That being so, the banks, the public sector banks became laggard in the banking sector, and they were not technologically advanced to come to the expectation of the customers in relation to the existing private sector banks and foreign banks who were giving stiff competition to the public sector banks. Okay, then with this situation, the government of India appointed the Committee on Financial Sector Reforms. That was first in 1991. That is known popularly as Narasimha Committee Report. 1991, they suggested various measures. The first, reform we can say after nationalization, financial sector or banking sector reforms. They had suggested very, very, radical measures, and to again have a follow-up. What has happened in 1998? The same committee again met to have a, review of the recommendation, how far they have been implemented and what more can be implemented. During this Narasimha Committee report, many reforms in fact took place in the banking sector. First of all, I can see the government of India or the Reserve Bank of India came with a relaxed CRR, SLR regime, which was very, very harsh. In fact, most of the bank resources were locked up in SLR and CRR, and the bankers were handicapped to lend more. It was a policy, old policy, but with this report of the Narasimhan Committee, it underwent a radical change. The rates were reduced in a very gradual measure, and that gave more resources to the banks to utilize in the various sectors. That apart, the interest rate, which was totally administered by the Reserve Bank of India, it was uniform for all the banks. Both the deposit rates and the advance rates were dictated by the central bank, that is the Reserve Bank of India. That also underwent some changes. Individual banks were given the freedom to fix their lending rate, deposit rate, on their own asset liability matching. So that was another freedom which came to the banking sector. Of course, the banks had to follow certain direction in case of priority sector lending and export finance. So that that sector, there was some regulatory interest rate prescribed by the Reserve Bank of India. Then gradually the prudential norms were introduced. That is, previously the loan accounts were, they were calculating the interest on the notional calculation. If somebody has taken a loan, how much of interest it is accruing, whether the borrower has paid or not, P&L account was drawn. So it was giving a very distorted picture of the bank's balance sheet. So the first attempt to bring the balance sheet to a realistic term in the international standard, the prudential norms were introduced, which categorize the loan books, loan accounts as per the behavior of the account. And I'm not going to the details. Many of you must be knowing these are all very old here, but I'm just taking you through the reform in a historical way. Then capital adequacy norms, which was imposed on the banks after the Basel, Basel meeting. All the banks, all the countries, they agreed to have a common accounting procedure and common capital adequacy norm. So this was another milestone in the reform of banking, and it forced the banks to become healthy. Either you have this ratio or you are out. So that brought a lot of pressure on the banks to become more efficient in terms of balance sheet. Then another silent revolution, I will say, it happened. The Government of India and Reserve Bank of India changed their policy, bank opening policy. So a few banks, a few lending institutions, term lending institutions like HDFC, UTI, IDBI, ICICI, they were basically term lending institutions. They were permitted to open banks. So there was a condition that these banks will be having the state-of-art technology to start with, and they will be permitted. And that brought another sort of wave in the financial sector, because the public sector banks, the old private sector banks, which were having the monopoly in the banking sector, they started feeling the pinch, because these banks, driven by latest technology, they attracted the cream of the customers, mostly elite class, and they were operating at par with foreign banks. So this is another milestone in the banking sector reforms. And what happened after this? Now, all the banks, whether private or public or new generation, it was found that there's accumulation of huge NPA. It has affected all the banks, irrespective of the ownership. And the bankers had very little instrument in their hand to recover the loans. First, they used to go to the court to filing money suit in the court to recover their dues. Then there were a few other methods like state-sponsored loans, which were covered under the state recovery acts, like agricultural loan and small-scale industry loan. So, but those were not very effective. So the Government of India brought the DRT, Debt Recovery Tribunals, in almost all the states to to ensure that there's a quick recovery of the bank loans. But gradually it was found that the DRTs are saddled with so much of loan, I mean so much of cases, that they became like civil courts. Nothing was moving. Some of the DRTs were taking side, questioning the bank decision. So the main objective of recovery was lost, and again the recovery position came back to square one. But then again, the government of India, various governments have been trying to reform this sector, and another government thought that okay, so enough is enough. Let's have a Securitization Act. The Securitization Act, which gave very wide power to the bankers to attach the properties and go for auction, all these things, it worked very nicely for some time. But again, another type of NPAs came, which were very big corporate loans, and which were also very politically sensitive, and it was very difficult for banks to fight it out in either DRT or under securitization. So to empower the banks, the government of India came with the IBC, that is, Insolvency Banking Code, under which what Professor Maharana was referring, that there will be quick resolution of the issues in the National Company Law Board and under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So this is now, again, this also has hit a roadblock now. Because of so many interpretations, so many stay order and all court intervention, this has also for last few years, few months, I find there is no movement. Maybe COVID is one of the reason, but there is not much of movement in this area also. And big borrowers, they have resorted to various means to negate these measures also, like somebody going away from the country, somebody seeking asylum outside, international law, protection, secrecy, so many things that's coming in. So it is now, the banking sector, to be very frank, is still in a very, very, crossroad. And next few years, like this present finance minister, madam, said that now after COVID, you will see a new resurrection or whatever you call in the banking sector. They are going to come out with new measures. They are going to come out with new amendment to the existing acts. And let's hope that next few months, along with the budget announcement, there will be some good news for the bankers. Otherwise, the banking sector is in a very bad shape again. And now the amalgamation or the mergers which have taken place, it is again a question mark how successfully they'll work, because each bank culture is different and each bank's tradition is different. And of course, they have gone system-wise on the same IT platform those banks were operating. They have been merged together first. So that has been complete. And there are other factors also, like the new generation banks, private sector banks. They are also facing a lot of issues like corporate governance issue and huge undisclosed NPA accounts or frauds which are coming out now. So somewhere something is happening, there's a failure in governance. Yesterday, I was reading that the government is saying the RBI inspection team has failed to unearth many of the activities which were undertaken by some private banks, particularly from enforcement directorate side, some action has been taken. So these are the issues which are affecting the banking sector now. And any country want to progress must have a very healthy banking setup. And in India, by that standard, there is a long way to go. But we are determined that our people are determined that they'll give a very good banking to the country. And with that hope, I leave it here. And there is a session on, insolvency and bankruptcy code also by Dr. S.K. Gupta. And I'm eagerly waiting to hear on that topic because he will be knowing better in the field. With that, I thank all of you again to be here and giving me the chance to talk in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for taking us back to the history of reforms in financial sector, and very correctly said by you that healthy banking system is indeed the backbone of any developed economy. Now, I would like to take the privilege to introduce our esteemed Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. P.P. Mathur. Professor Mathur is an eminent academician, a renowned scientist, and an able academic administrator, having about 38 years of rich experience of postgraduate teaching and research. Sir is a PhD in geology from Banaras Hindu University. Before accepting his current assignment at BGU, Professor Mathur was the professor and head Department of Biochemistry, Molecular Biology, and Dean School of Life Science at Pondicherry University. Professor Mathur has also successfully completed a 5-year term as Vice Chancellor of KIIT at Bhubaneswar during 2012 to 2017. He is also a fellow National Academy of fellow at National Academy of Medical Sciences India, National Academy of Science, and Indian Science Congress Association, and has served as visiting professor in many reputed institutions. He has successfully guided several doctoral, MPhil, and PhD dissertations and has received many awards for his excellence in research, which includes Ashutosh Mukherjee Memorial Award for 2015-16 from Prime Minister, Lifetime Achievement Award of ISSRF at AIIMS, New Delhi in 2017, and Young Scientist Award of Indian Science Congress Association in 1985. Now, I would request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. P.P. Mathur, to kindly deliver his address. Sir.
Thank you, Professor Neha Joshi. Good afternoon to you all, respected dignitaries who have joined us, CMA Thomas Matthew, Managing Director, Odisha Capital Market Enterprises, CMA Dr. S.K. Gupta, Managing Director, RVO, the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, Professor B.K. Das, Registrar, Birla Global University, CMA Mr. Mukesh Chaube, Chairman ICI Bhubaneswar Chapter, Professor Maharana, Dean, Birla School of Commerce, CMA Saktidhar Singh, Chairman PD Committee ICI Bhubaneswar, Dr. Neha Joshi, and CMA Ajay Kumar Samal, all the other distinguished people, those who have joined this event, and students, ladies and gentlemen. It is my proud privilege to welcome you all to, though virtually, to the Birla School of Commerce of Birla Global University, which has organized a webinar on financial sector reforms and resurgent Indian economy. I think this is a very relevant topic which has been chosen, and I thank the organizers for choosing such a topic at such an appropriate time. And I'm sure that the distinguished panelists and speakers would give their thought-provoking ideas to young minds so that some of the things can be jointly discussed and put forward. I would expect that such things should be publicized also, and some kind of prepared and could to the government as the outcome, if possible. Basically, I think that this discussion on financial reform is so important because it is directly related to the development of a country. And I think the financial threats or whatever we have seen last year, it is not only the financial threat we saw the last year, but all kinds of changes or in reforms which have been done just to create an efficient competitive and stable system, which can contribute to stimulate the growth. And the crisis which we saw in 90s, the late 80s and early 90s, of the balance of payment crisis, which really threatened the country of getting international credibility erosion of the country. And that time in 1991, the reforms were brought in. Whatever it happened, and I think it has delivered quite good to the country. And now we are at this place, this time. In between, there could have been many ups and downs, and particularly the kind of V-shaped curve which is predicted at this point in time is also because of the pandemic which happened, and it contracted the economy to quite a level, and 7.7% or something like that. The GDP has contracted, and now the prediction is like this, that 11% growth will take place. I'm certain that the kind of budgeting planning or would be done would bring the desired changes or whatever. Of course, I am not not even expert, not even a layman to talk about it. It will be just, if I talk more, then it is just like carrying coal to Newcastle. And I will not attempt to do it, but I will certainly say that the vibrant economy is so important, but the economy is also dependent on many, many natural calamities, and the pandemic, which was done by the most humble virus, which has hardly any existence and has created such a panic. So we should build a kind of economy, and we should try to foresee such kinds of things, forecasting of such things, and make not only the system which would take care of certain eventualities. And what I'm thinking, that this pandemic, even after vaccination, might get over at this time or a little bit over at this time, but it is not going to get eradicated, nor future pandemics would be debarred. So we have to see that how we can work together, in the sense that we as economists should also understand the different factors. And I think never I saw the factorization of biological crisis among financial. I never heard any lecture on that how biological crisis would affect financial growth of the whole world. It has become standstill. So I think these kinds of discussions also should happen, where we must understand the kind of things which can happen and how they can be prevented. Of course, our School of Commerce has to be congratulated for doing things and bringing in so many collaborations with so many different institutes. And I'm very glad that Institute of Cost Accountants have shown a kind of strength standing with us. And we will see that if this kind of relationship is not let down anytime, we would try to build it further and further and grow it more. And we have also started thinking on some lines, and the School of Commerce has again launched and some new courses, and like including the certificate courses, a course on financial planning and investment management. In the university, we are also trying to build in other strengths also, and we have also launched certificate course on applied data science. From this year, we are starting MBA in banking technology, which I hope would be a good course in this part of the country where such kind of courses are not available. And we are trying to launch one BSc program in data science also. So I would crave your indulgence in our activities, so that this institution grows further and further and can take up bigger challenges than only subject domain choice. I think the university should be completely interdisciplinary, and also seek the collaboration with all kinds of professional bodies. And I'm sure that this particular webinar would go a long way in building or strengthening our relationship. And of course, the students would also get benefited, our faculty will get benefited, and overall the institution gets strengthened. And in the process, we will try to see that how we can participate and collaborate in the activities of Institute of Cost Accountant of India. With these words, I wish this program a great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable insights on the topic and for always guiding us and motivating us to go ahead in the path of growth. We are privileged to have with us today CMA CS Dr. S.K. Gupta as our resource person for this webinar. He is an FCS, FCMA and holds a doctoral degree in the area of corporate governance. Dr. Gupta has over 40 years of corporate experience in leadership position with various public and private sector organizations in the domain of finance, costing, internal audit, legal, and company secretarial function. Dr. Gupta is currently Managing Director of the Registered Valuers Organization of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. Dr. Gupta has also chaired several seminars and conferences and has been visiting faculty at various business schools like IMT, BIMTech, IIT, ICSI, ICAI, Narsi Munji, and Symbiosis for over 30 years. Sir has also written over 150 articles and research papers in various domains of insolvency and bankruptcy code, finance, management accounting, corporate reporting, corporate governance, corporate restructuring, and corporate law, which are regularly published in various reputed professional journals. Sir, your varied experience is thrilling and highly inspiring. May I now request you to kindly deliver your address on insolvency and bankruptcy code. Sir, please.
Thank you so much, respected dignitaries on the panel, as well as amongst the participants audience. I'm really thankful to Birla Global University and the Odisha chapter, Bhubaneswar chapter of Institute of Cost Accountants of India for having invited me and having given me an opportunity to share my perspective and my thoughts on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Prior to this position, which I'm holding today, I was MD and CEO of Insolvency Professional Agency of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India for over 2 years. So I've seen the code evolve, grow, and develop over a period of time. So probably I would like to share my perspective of the same. I understand that maybe a few students are also part of the participants group here. So I would like to take it right from the basics and then try to build on the subject, giving live case studies as well, so as to make the topic interesting as well as engaging for everyone present here. I'll just make a small presentation. I'm just sharing that on the screen right now. So Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 is one of the deepest economic reforms undertaken in India after achieving independence. Of course, there have been many reforms, quite a few significant ones, the introduction of GST in the country, or the LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, globalization of 1991, as well as many other significant economic reforms, but nonetheless, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 is nonetheless a very significant and deep economic reform undertaken by the country. IBC is a landmark piece of legislation which seeks to redress the distress of the companies in a time-bound manner while balancing the interest of all these stakeholders. It's a rare example of a law which has seen speedy rollout and implementation. And it's a one-stop solution for all companies in distress. It's been a game changer over the period of last 4 years, but saying that it's been a game changer would probably only be an understatement. It's been a great instrument that has really worked quite well, even though with some problems here and there, but nonetheless, the contribution of IBC in the economy of the country over the period of last 4 years is quite significant. I'll be sharing with you some statistics on that to elaborate and validate the same fact. Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code has greatly helped India in achieving 63rd rank in terms of ease of doing business, which was around 140 a few years back, maybe 3-4 years back. The law has brought about a significant change in the power sharing equation between creditors and debtors. Well, the BLRC, that is the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee, as a result of recommendation of which committee this code came into being, made it very clear that so long as the company is able to meet its debt obligations on time, the equity shareholders have complete control on the corporate entity. But as soon as there is a default, and there is a default in meeting of debt obligations, I think the control has to pass over to the creditors. So we have moved over to the situation of debtors in possession to creditors in control. But then it has also helped India in redressing to a certain extent the problem of non-performing assets, which at one point of time were huge piled up, but now probably there is at least a control to the accretion part of it, even though the absolute number may not have come down very significantly over the period of last 4 years, but at least the accretion of new incremental NPAs, it has definitely slowed down over a period of time. As a result of the efforts that have been made under IBC, India was awarded the GRR Global Restructuring Review Award for the year 2019, which is a very, very significant achievement that India has made, having received that award as one of the most improved insolvency jurisdictions in the world as a whole. Well, I'd like to briefly touch upon the genesis of IBC as to why it was felt that we need a kind of a law such as Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. You know, the world is changing, and the world is changing very, very fast. We are living in a VUCA world where the business dynamics is very, very uncertain, very volatile, very complex, and very ambiguous. We live in a world where the world's largest travel car company does not own a single car. Look at the business model. We live in a world where the world's largest travel lodging company does not own a single hotel room, Airbnb. We live in a world where the world's largest retailer does not own a single brick and mortar store, Amazon. These are very, very disruptive business models, unheard of till about a few decades back. But these are the new businesses across the world today. And we find many of these businesses have profitless turnover. They have a good enough top line, good enough turnover, but end of the day, no profit. Or we find businesses which have cashless profit. They have a good enough bottom line, but end of the day, there is no liquidity or there is no cash available in the business. But when you look at their valuations, skyrocketing, soaring very, very high. That's the nature, disruptive nature of the business models that we see across the world today. And in such kind of VUCA situation, it is but natural for at least some of the business plans of some of the businesses to fail and not work out the way they were expected to be. Because they are dependent upon working of the market forces, and these market forces which are very, very uncertain, vulnerable and complex, it is but natural for some of the businesses to fail. And therefore, there was the need for some kind of a legislation whereby in case things don't work out the way they were expected to be by the entrepreneur, and the resources which are very, very scarce, and they get attached or they get used up in those assets which are not working, we needed a kind of a legislation by which we could pull out those resources out of those inefficient uses and put them back into productive channels. That's what IBC attempts to do, that pull out resources from those inefficient uses into which they got stuck for various reasons, maybe technology, maybe management, maybe lack of finance, maybe lack of innovation, maybe lack of ideas, maybe lack of a inefficient business model. But once it happens, we need to bring those resources out and put them back into productive channels. Secondly, when someone wants to get into a business, what is that he essentially looks for? I think he looks for three kinds of freedoms. First is freedom of entry. That means anyone wanting to get into a business, it should be an easy, smooth process. There shouldn't be too many approvals required. There shouldn't be too many requirements of taking licenses, quotas, and things like that. I think that in India has been liberalized to quite an extent after the LPG, the liberalization, privatization, and globalization wave that erupted in 1990-91. Second thing that someone would look for is freedom to continue. Everyone would like to maintain his business on a long-term sustained basis as a going concern. And for that, there needs to be a process by which it is easier to run a business after having started it and after having set up. There shouldn't be too many compliances to meet. There shouldn't be too many regulatory controls on the business which is running, up and running. And in that extent also, the country has achieved a modicum of stability and maturity. But what was missing hitherto till now was freedom to fail or freedom to exit. Because of the VUCA situation, because of the problems of business dynamics the world across, it is but natural for some of the businesses to fail. And in case they fail, they need freedom to exit and thus get away and then probably start a new lease of life by whatever they want to do with that. This is freedom to fail, and freedom to exit is what has been provided by insolvency and bankruptcy code. Earlier, it was like a Chakravyuh challenge. You know how to get into it, but you don't know how to get out of it. In Silicon Valley, the startup nursery of the entire world, if someone has failed there in 2 startups or 3 startups, he's considered as a great guy because he might not have succeeded in carrying out his setup or start a business, but he has amassed a lot of learnings because of failures in 2 startups. In India, if someone has failed in 1 startup or 2 startups and he wants to get back to a job or real life employment situation, he finds it very difficult. The industry considers him to be a failure because he hasn't been able to step up, sustain his startup business. I think this mindset needs to be changed because in this dynamic business world, it is very, very natural for businesses to fail. And then we need some kind of a legislation by which we are able to maneuver those companies out, maneuver those businesses out, and put them back onto the path of restructuring, revival, and recovery. IBC was required in India to provide a comprehensive law single platform to deal with financial distress of the companies. We had various legal provisions even earlier. We had Presidency Towns Insolvency Act, Provincial Towns Insolvency Act, we had SICA, we had BIFER, we had SARFAESI, we had RDDBI, we had the Companies Act. We had corporate debt restructuring, we had joint lenders forum restructuring, we had S4, but all of these had their own limitations and somehow things were not working out the way the economy expected them to be. And therefore, it was felt that we need a comprehensive law and a single platform where all these distressed companies could be brought and they could be probably attempted to be resolved. And if it is not possible to resolve the distress, then push them into liquidation. Either way, get the problem sorted out. IBC was required to assure that whenever there is a financial stress in a company, it should be detected at the earliest. Because if there is delay in detection of distress, to that extent, there's going to be value erosion. Cancer is a very deadly disease. But if it is caught and detected early on, I think doctors say that it can be treated. But if there is delay in detection of the cancer, then probably things go out of hand, and then probably it's not possible to handle the patient. Anyway, it becomes impossible kind of thing. IBC was required to provide a time-bound resolution for rescue of those businesses which are failing, which have failed, but which are viable. You know, you can have a failing business which is viable. You can also have a failing business which is unviable. So we must try to revive and restructure, recover those companies, help them survive, which are failing businesses for various reasons, but nonetheless, which are viable. And this must be attempted to be done within a time-bound resolution. So in IBC, we have defined timelines within which a corporate insolvency resolution process has to be carried out. 180 days initial, extension is possible for 90 days more, and then you have overarching 330 days in case there are some legal hassles or some cases go to the courts, then again further 60 days are allowed. Overarching 330 days is the total time available within which a company's distress has to be either resolved, revived, restructured, or the company gets pushed into liquidation. It provides a collective platform for various stakeholders to take a decision, and it provides an opportunity for sending unviable businesses to liquidation at the earliest so that value erosion can be prevented. The key objectives of IBC are maximization of value of the assets for the companies which are in distress, and to resolve the distress of the companies in a time-bound manner, to promote entrepreneurship. How? Once you know that in case you fail, you have a way out. You have a leeway, the way you can get out of that business. This flexibility or this availability of freedom to fail and freedom to exit is definitely going to spur entrepreneurship within the country. To promote availability of credit, bankers, lenders, financial institutions have now a recourse of being able to recover, maybe not, but at least part of the money that they have lent and which got stuck into inefficient assets. It provides availability of credit and promotes availability of credit. And the beauty of this entire structure which has been created is it seeks to balance the interest of all the stakeholders, the corporate debtor, the bankers, financial institutions, employees, governments, tax authorities. Everyone's interest is sought to be taken care of under IBC, balancing the interest of all stakeholders. Well, India passed IBC only 4 years back, but it's been in existence in other countries for quite some time, 4 decades, 3 decades, 2 decades. But the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of India has certain key distinguishing characteristics which are not available in bankruptcy laws prevailing in other jurisdictions. I would just like to give a few examples very, very briefly. No other jurisdiction, the bankruptcy laws provide for any kind of timelines for resolution of the distress of the companies. When in India, we have specific provision of timelines. Specific timelines have been created under IBC to resolve the distress of the companies, which is a distinguishing key feature of IBC, which is very distinct from the bankruptcy law prevailing in other advanced jurisdictions. Second is, we make a clear distinction between a financial creditor and an operational creditor. In other jurisdictions, they make a distinction between a secured creditor and an unsecured creditor, but they don't make any distinction between FC and OC. which is again a key distinguishing feature of IBC 2016. In other countries, say for example, US, bankruptcy laws, you have Chapter 11, which deals with restructuring of the company, and Chapter 11, which deals with winding up. Chapter 7, restructuring, Chapter 11, winding up, and the company can decide, or creditors can decide to take the company either through Chapter 7 or through Chapter 11 at one and the same time. But in India, duality. The code itself says the objective of the code is to seek the revival of the companies which are in problem, which are in distress. First, you must attempt to revive those companies. We want companies to live. We want companies to be a going concern on a sustained basis going forward. But if that attempt fails, only then the company gets pushed into liquidation. But first, you must make an attempt to revive the company through the corporate insolvency resolution process. The fourth key distinguishing feature is information utility, which is one of the key pillars of IBC 2016. It's a separate entity proposed under IBC, a separate agency, a separate corporate entity, which collates data pertaining to debtors and creditors, cross-validates the data so that information asymmetry can be avoided. And this validated data can be used by various stakeholders in the process of CIRP as well as liquidation. No other country in the world has provision of this kind of an entity just as information utility. These were the earlier insolvency regimes which I've already talked about. So in India, first you have to attempt corporate resolution of the company. If the resolution fails, then only the company gets pushed into corporate liquidation. Both cannot be taken up simultaneously. You don't have a choice of pushing company into liquidation right on first day. You first got to try its revival. If that fails, only then you can perhaps push the company into liquidation. What's been the scorecard over the period of last 4 years? IBC 2016 has changed the behavior of the borrowers and lenders. It has to be seen in terms of statistics that we have, that there are over 3,000 licensed insolvency professionals operating in the marketplace. It's not that any chartered accountant, any cost accountant, any MBA can practice as an insolvency professional. There is a process that you must have a certain number of years of experience. Then you must qualify an exam conducted by Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Then you must also undergo a 50 hours mandatory educational program, a training program. Then you become a licensed insolvency professional eligible to handle cases under IBC. As of today, we have over 3,000 insolvency professionals who are operating in the marketplace. Over 4,000 cases have been admitted. Many more number of cases have been filed, but there is a difference between filing and admission. Filing is when you have filed a case, but it is yet to be admitted into the court process because NCLT is yet not decided as to whether to take the case into its fold or not. That's where the case is yet to be admitted. About 275 companies have resolved under IBC 2016 in the period of last 4 years. About over 1,000 companies have been pushed into liquidation. Yes, the number of companies which have got pushed into liquidation is almost about 4 times than that of being revived. But the reason for that is that those companies which were already very, very sick, which were under SICA, which were under BIFER, all these companies got transferred under IBC. There was not much of hope of their revival. End of the day, they had to be pushed into liquidation. That's the reason why such a large number of companies have gotten pushed into liquidation process. About 750 corporates have also filed for voluntary liquidation. The average realization as a result of IBC has been about 48%. For every rupee, you've been able to recover 48 paise. less than 50%, I agree. But under the previous laws, the average realization was just about 22-23%. It is at least double than that of, or at least more than double of that. It's currently about 48%. What is more important to remember, realize, is this 48% realization value on an average is 208% of the liquidation value of the companies. If there was no IBC, if all these companies were to be pushed into liquidation under the erstwhile laws prevailing in the country, then the recovery would have been less to that extent. This is 208% more than the liquidation value of the company. The average time taken so far, of course, some cases have taken more than 800 days, 900 days, but the average time taken to resolve 275 cases so far has been about 310 days. Much better as compared to average of 4.5 years, which it used to take on an average under the erstwhile laws. Whereas there were cases where the cases were lingering in the courts for a number of years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but 4.5 years was the average time, which has now come down to something like 300, 310 days. More than 2 lakh crores of rupees has already been released from the stressed assets. This is direct accretion, incremental addition to the money supply existing in the country for economic growth and economic development as a result of IBC. Many cases have been settled even before admission because promoters know, owners of the business know that in case there is a default and in case the case gets admitted under IBC, they may lose the control of the company, which probably they would be running now as a third generation entrepreneurs or even fourth generation entrepreneurs. They may probably have to lose the control of the company. Therefore, they make all efforts to try and settle the cases even before admission. Some cases have also been withdrawn after admission. There is a provision in the code under section 12A that a company once admitted as a case under IBC can also withdraw that case. It is changing the credit culture of the country, and it has instilled a fear in the mind of promoters that in case they default, they may lose the control of their company. 42% of the companies which have gone under IBC so far, they are from the manufacturing sector, various segments of the manufacturing sector. About 15% of the companies are from services segment, including hotels, transportation, communication, restaurant. And banks and operational creditors have dragged 90% of the companies to the National Company Law Tribunal, NCLT, under IBC. What has been the impact of IBC on the lenders and the borrowers? IBC has had a carrot and stick effect, making companies serious about governance, making companies take the default in debt obligations very, very seriously, and thus trying to bring stuck capital back into productive channels of the economy. It's still a work in progress, of course. It's just been 4 years that the law has been in the offing, but the system is surely working. IBC is a law of the people, by the people, for the people. The code has been a successful economic instrument in reviving, restructuring, saving companies which otherwise would have faced liquidation. It has impacted lives of the people. It has impacted livelihoods of the people. It has also impacted lives of the firms in a big way. Therefore, it is a very, very significant socio-economic legislation which is working for the betterment of the country and the economy. It has brought about a complete reversal of policy, switching from recovery to revival. Instead of aiming at recovery of the default or stuck loan, the process now has changed gears and it has changed focus. And the focus now is on revival, that you must try to let the company survive. If it's a failing business, but if it's a viable business, it should be allowed to be survived. If it's a failing business, and if it is also an unviable business, then of course nobody can do anything about that. The company would get pushed into liquidation. IBC has brought about a change in the equation between the debtors and creditors, moving from debtors in possession to creditors in control. In the earlier debtor-friendly environment, the defaulting debtors, they secured moratoriums, there was forced write-down, retaining management control over the borrowing units, and that all attempts were made to thwart the efforts of the bank to realize their money, either by SARFAESI or by any other action that might be taken. But those things are now over. I think earlier there used to be a call from a banker saying that your company is going to default. Please come discuss with us. Maybe we can restructure whatever has to be done. The managing director of the company used to take it very, very lightly. He used to send some junior accounts person, go and talk to the banker, get it sorted out. But now if there is a call coming from the bank, the managing director himself rushes onto the bank to meet the lower level bank official to get it sorted out again, because otherwise he knows what are going to be the likely consequences. It has changed the borrower's behavior. They are now taking the default very, very seriously because they know the consequences can be very, very serious. Lenders have also started exercising stricter loan evaluation criteria. Now, every bank has a loan evaluation criteria. There's no doubt about that. But the depth and the extent to which it is carried out, the sincerity with which it is carried out, the expertise that the bankers have to evaluate the loan evaluation criteria, that somehow is and was a big question mark. But now, ever since the government has started pegging banks on to have a more effective loan evaluation criteria, the bankers have also woken up to their respective challenge, and they are exercising better due diligence before releasing money for a given loan. IBC has created a credit culture that discourages default. So it is trying to act, and it is acting as a deterrent against default. The culture of not paying back loans and getting away without any punishment, it had to be broken. You have various other means by which recovery was tried to be attempted earlier, but report of RBI says as a percentage of claims, banks recovered on an average 42.5%. They said at one point of time, but now the recovery has improved. 48% during the financial year, as against 14.5% through SARFAESI, 3.5% only through DRT, and 5.3% only through Lok Adalats. This has acted as a major instrument of recovery of defaulting money, from where a major chunk has been driven out from those inefficient uses into which the money got stuck for various reasons in the country. The provision of the code ensures a check not only on the promoters but also on the banks. IBC acts as an instrument to drive banks to refer specific cases of default under IBC. Dirty dozen, the top 12 cases which got referred, 8 have been resolved so far out of that. And similarly, now RBI has directed the banks to refer to the second set of cases, which are high level, high amount yielding cases with big corporates, which are required to be now sent to the IBC. NPAs have come down, maybe not so much in absolute numbers, but I said at least in terms of incremental addition or accretion of NPAs, it has definitely stalled. I recently wrote a paper. I checked up the real life data. Definitely accretion rate is low, even though in absolute numbers, the NPAs might not seem to have been reduced to an extent that we expected them to be. Government has now recently come out with a draft white paper on pre-pack insolvency mechanism, whereby the government is asking the lenders and the borrowers, the creditors, to work out a restructuring plan out of IBC and then come back with an agreed restructuring plan before NCLT, get the approval of NCLT, get moving, get the company revived, get the company restructured. I think this is going to be a major benefit and a major improvement in the IBC regime. The time period involved where the companies get dragged into legal hassles, dragged into legal court cases, that's going to come down, because it's going to be a situation where the people involved in the corporate functioning, they pre-agree on a certain structure of restructuring, structure of reviving of the company, and then come with a resolution plan, which only requires authoritative approval, thappa of the NCLT, and then you get moving. Government has come out with a draft pre-packed insolvency mechanism. They have opened it up for public expert comments. And of course, within the next few weeks of time, they're going to finalize that based upon the feedback that they get from the people. The government as of now is also looking at provisions for cross-border insolvency. It is not uncommon for many of the Indian companies to have assets outside the country, maybe by way of manufacturing facility, maybe by way of kind of a business setup or whatever. Many Indian companies have operations outside. Similarly, many foreign companies have operations in India. Now, as of now, if a company has operations outside India and this company goes bankrupt under IBC, you can't really touch the assets of the company which are situated out of the country. But then the government is now coming out, working on a draft paper. They have formed a committee. I'm also part of that working group committee, and we are working out draft guidelines for bringing about cross-border mechanism, cross-border insolvency mechanism. I think Jet Airways case is the first cross-border insolvency mechanism, because in case of Jet Airways, one of the companies in Amsterdam, Netherlands, they brought a case against Jet Airways, and that's where the insolvency provision started, in addition to the company getting into IBC in India as well. Then there are also provisions regarding group insolvency, which are going to come very shortly. These are emerging areas. We know that there are groups, corporate groups, Tata, Birla, Reliance, any kind of group for that matter, where if a company gets into insolvency, and that being a legal corporate entity of its own, it stands alone, you can't touch the assets of other companies of the group, because in the company law, we have a well-known concept of the corporate veil. You can't lift the corporate veil because each company is a separate, standalone, isolated corporate entity. But again, it's a fact of life that this company may have huge investments or interlocking interconnections with other companies of the group. But as of now, you can't touch the assets of the company which are parked or lying under different companies of the same group. The government is likely to come out with provisions relating to group insolvency also very, very shortly. Then the government is also looking at individual insolvency. Now, individual insolvency has three dimensions. You can talk about insolvency of promoter guarantors or personal guarantors to corporate debtors. You can talk about insolvency of partnership firms. You can talk about insolvency of partnerships, and you can talk about insolvency of individuals. As of now, there are provisions in the code for all the three aspects, but as of now, the rules and regulations have only been rolled out for personal guarantors to corporate debtors. The government and IBBI are yet working on the guidelines, rules, and regulations required for rolling on the insolvency of partnerships, insolvency of partnership firms, and insolvency of individuals. So all in all, to summarize, if we may say that IBC has been instrumental in building up a new kind of a culture in the financial sector or the financial market in the country, both from the lender's perspective as well as the borrower's perspective. It's a work in progress. There are problems. The company's cases are being dragged into legal issues unnecessarily, and that's delaying the entire process. But then, well, the government is aware about all that. Ministry of Corporate Affairs is working. IBBI is working towards that, and they are trying to bridge the various loopholes and trying to make it an instrument of major revival, major restructuring, and major dynamic economic situation growth within the country. With that, I conclude my brief presentation. I'll be too pleased to share my perspective on any questions that will be there from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking us to the basics of the codes and also giving us a comprehensive knowledge about the course in total, highlighting advantages, disadvantages, and also how it has helped different forms of business. Very correctly mentioned by you in the beginning that IBC is indeed hopeless, will take us from hopeless end to endless hope for the budding entrepreneurs of the country. Next, we have with us CMA Thomas Matthews as a resource person for this session. Sir is a qualified cost accountant and an active investor in capital market. Sir has rich industrial experience of 12 years and has served as director and CEO in Bhubaneswar Stock Exchange. It is because of his knack for teaching, he has also been associated to various academic educational institutions for past 15 years, imparting knowledge to young minds in the domain of finance. Sir, we are highly obliged to have you with us here today. May I request you to kindly address us on capital market and investors' behavior? Sir, kindly unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Very warm good afternoon to one and all. Respected Mr. SK Gupta, Mathur sir, Das sir, and my friend, philosopher and guide Samson sir, and CMA Saktidhar Singh, CMA Mukesh Chaubey. It gives me a great feeling that my alma mater, the Institute of Cost and Management Accountants, and Birla Global University, with whom I have a very close association, have gone a number of times, have come together to organize this kind of a seminar. I'm really indebted and thankful that this kind of a thing has happened. And I'm sure that the benefit is going to go to everybody, both the Institute of Cost and Management Accountants and Birla Global University, and the students of both the fraternity. They are going to be really enlightened and benefited by this kind of association. I'm sure we can have more kind of seminars of this kind, which is going to be very helpful to all of us. Today, the world is going through very challenging times, and India is no exception. We have seen this COVID coming and destroying our lives to a large extent. Since World War II, this has been the biggest challenge or the biggest problem that the world has ever seen. And this crisis has come on to the capital market also. It has affected the industry, the economy in a very drastic way, to the extent that Nifty, the indicator of the movement of share prices, it came down to about 7,600 in March 23. So it was a very gloomy environment for all of us when Nifty came to such low levels. But over a period of time, the market recovered and it reached all-time high recently of about 14,750. It was the all-time high that we had. But again, now it has settled down a little bit more at comfortable levels of 13,634. So this kind of a roller coaster ride that we are seeing, I am sure in the next few days also we will be seeing it, because on Monday again we are having the budget, and what is there for us, we don't know, because our finance minister, Nirmala Sitaram, she's going to have a very tough time balancing everything. She has to go for new taxes. At the same time, she has to go for development. And any new taxes is going to affect the economy in an adverse way. But at the same time, the finances has to be brought in so that the social development of the country, the economic development of the country, the demand can be created so that the capital market revives, the economy revives. And today, the capital market is something that cannot be ignored at all. Today, the total market capitalization of the Indian stock market has reached 1 crore 86 lakh crores. So, I mean, it's a figure a common man will not be able to really understand. It's about 186 trillion rupees, or in other words, it's 186 followed by 12 zeros. So that is the kind of a capitalization that we are having. So with that kind of a capitalization, this is something that the finance ministers, the corporates, the students, none of us can ignore, because this is the nerve of the economy. So any kind of a price movement is going to affect each and everybody. And the volumes also that has been generated right now in the stock market is almost at an all-time high. NSE itself is having about 84,000 crores per day transaction. And to add that another 4,000 crores of Bombay Stock Exchange, that brings us close to about 88,000 crores. So with this kind of a volumes, so a lot of things can happen. And with the kind of capital market craze that is happening among the common masses, I'm sure very soon the daily turnover of the Indian stock market will cross 1 lakh crores. Now, why this kind of a development is happening? Because of a lot of reforms, lot of changes in the capital market term. Today, we are having a situation where the foreign financial institutions are pumping in huge amount of money. Like this year, till January, till now, they are pumped in about 18,856 crore rupees into the Indian capital market. The reason for that is, in the international market, the rate of interest has come down. And India is one of the fastest growing economy in the world. Of course, China is there. For a short period of time when the pandemic was there, we had a negative growth also around 24% in one quarter. But now again, things are coming back to its normal self, where we will be having about 8% GDP growth. With a 8% GDP growth, so we will find that the capital market also will start developing at about 15% per annum growth rate will be there in the market capitalization, which is going to be very, very beneficial to all the investors. But of course, we had a lot of major events, like saw that good leading private banks was on the verge of closure. But anyway, the government intervened and brought in major reforms, because of which the bank got saved. And today, I am sure over a period of time, Yes Bank will get its old name back. There was another situation where the Franklin Templeton that had to close down 6 of its debt funds, which is also something unheard of. So this kind of major events is going to have a major effect on the Indian capital market. Now, another major reforms that SEBI has brought in the capital market is if you want to sell your shares also, and if you don't have any credit in your account, you will not be able to do that. So first of all, either you have to put in a certain amount of money with your broker, or you will have to keep a certain amount of shares pledged with the broker. So with the effect that a failure in the capital market is going to be unheard of. This is a kind of a reform that we were all looking forward to. So where the safety of the brokers, the safety of the investors, and safety of the entire financial market would have a substantial improvement. Unless and until this kind of a financial security comes into the capital market, you will find people will be jittery to put their money in. And if people are jittery in putting their money in, so we'll find that the growth in the capital market is never going to happen. So SEBI has come with a situation where we need to change for the better. And with the example of this shares being pledged, it has proven that unless and until no options are given to the investors and to people, things will not happen. And in a very short span of time, though there was a lot of confusion in the capital market, whether the new system of pledging your shares will be successful or not, but SEBI has proved to the entire investing community that they were successful in implementing the new reforms, which is going to be a very strong point for the Indian capital market. And for those people who are looking to the capital market as a means of investment, let me tell you that capital market is one of the best forms of investments. I'll give you a simple figures. If somebody has put in 1 lakh rupees way back in 1980 in fixed deposits, today it would be worth about 18 lakhs. The same amount of 1 lakh rupees back in 1980, if you had put it in gold, it would have worth about 41 lakh. And the same amount of money, if you had put in silver, it would have been a little lesser, to the extent of 29 lakhs. But if you had put the same amount of money in the capital market, 1 lakh rupees invested in 1980, today it is worth 4 crores 62 lakhs. That is the appreciation, and we are not taking the dividend into consideration. So you can see the kind of phenomenal returns that the capital market is providing to investors. But again, it has to be the long-term investment, not short-term. If you are investing in the capital market, so you should always have a long-term vision. Short-term investors, the speculators, they rarely make money in the stock market. So if at all, if you want to get into the stock market, I will always tell you the best way is to look for long-term. So today, there are a lot of structural changes that has happened because of pandemic, like what Neha ma'am, she has told that any crisis brings in opportunities also. So we face the crisis, and now we have to gather or encash onto the opportunities that lies ahead. So the capital market is going to benefit the corporates in a big way. Like all these years, we find that the rentals had hit the roof, but now it has stabilized. We are having a situation where properties are available at a reasonable rate of returns. So because of which the corporates are going to get benefited by that. And of course, the rate of interest has come down. Earlier, the deposit rate was around 8%, which has dropped down to about 5%. So the lending rate has also dropped down from about 8%. It has come down to about 6 to 7%. In the housing sector, the rate of interest has really dropped below 6%. So this kind of a lower rate interest is very, very beneficial to the corporate world, because of which the corporates would be able to go for borrowings and go for investments, and which will again give growth benefit to all the industries. Then another positive thing is that has happened is in the last about 5 years or so, the salary rates were really shooting up. But now again, because of the pandemic, the salary rates are also started coming down. And in India, we are having a very big positive situation because we are having a large number of working population as a population of the, as a percentage of the total population. So which is going to be very, very beneficial. No other country or no other big country in the world has this kind of advantage where the percentage of working people compared to the total population is very, very high. Like the entire Europe, if you see, it's the old age people who dominate. The old age people who happen to be the majority in the European countries. Whereas in India, we are having a situation where the working class happens to be much more than the old people. So the benefit of that is going to come to the Indian companies and all, because of which we would be able to compete in the world standards. And today we are having a situation where the salary rates in India is also very reasonable. That is why companies like Wipro, TCS, Infosys and all, they are able to get a lot of international businesses back to India, which is going to get a lot of employment opportunities also for our people. So because of all these things, we will find that the corporates are also going to do very well, and the entire economy will do very well. Hello, can you hear me? Hello. I think people are getting restless already.
No, sir, we can hear you, sir. There's someone with mic.
Okay. And then another interesting thing that is happening is the international rate of interest has also fallen. countries like Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Internationally also, we are having many countries where the rate of interest has become negative. So now all those money is going to pour into India, and the benefit will come into the capital market. Of course, it's going to get the benefit of in the industry also. So in these kind of a situation, just on Monday, we are having the budget also. We don't know what is going to be in store for us, all of us. And my humble request to the finance minister through this channel or through this platform would be that there are two major things that needs to be done for the capital market. One is that the dividend should be made tax-free. This is a situation where there is a double taxation for the investors. First of all, we are putting our money in a company and they are doing business, and the profit of that business is taxable. The corporate tax is there. And after the corporate tax is paid, whatever is left over, if that is being distributed among the investor, again, the investor has to pay a tax on that, which is the dividend tax, which is absolutely unjustified. So through this platform, we should put it across to the finance minister that an investor's money is being double taxed. First, but it's taxed in the hands of the company, and later on when it comes back to the investor, again it is taxable. The next point I want to put across is the long-term capital gain used to be nil rate, and in transaction tax which is levied. So now what happened is we are having the security transaction tax is also levied, and in addition to that, the long-term capital gains is also taxable. So my humble request to the finance minister is that either you have a tax on long-term capital gains or you have security transaction tax. If both becomes taxable, then what happens is it becomes a deterrent to the investor. But in spite of all those things, I'm sure the capital market is going to give a very fantastic rate of returns in the long run. Short terms, I'm sure it will be unpredictable. Maybe because of the budget and all, there will be a lot of volatility. Prices might come down in the short period of time. But any investor who invests in the capital market for a long period of time, I'm sure that you'll be getting a fantastic rate of returns, which is going to be much higher than the rate of interest which any bank is offering or any other financial instruments which are being offered to the general public. And with this positive note, hoping that the budget is good, I wish all investors a very happy investment. And once again, I thank Neha ma'am for having coordinated the entire thing, and I'm thankful to the Institute of Cost and Management Accountants to bring us all to a common platform where we could share our views with everybody. And also the Birla Global University for having taken the initiative to bring all of us together. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for showing us silver lining amidst this crisis situation, and looking for we hope for a brighter future in the investment market, like you said. Moving ahead, we will have question and answering session. We have received, I think, some of the question. I would request CMA Shaktidhar Singh to kindly take over from here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Neha madam. But actually, I have many times requested to put the queries in the chat box, but till now there is any queries. So I would like to request participants who have any queries may unmute your mic and ask directly. Then our resource person will clarify.
I have one question to CMA Thomas Matthew.
Yes.
Sir, you talked about abolition of dividend tax and you also talked about either removal of LTCG as STT is there. But at the same time, the argument what finance minister and government gives is those who are making good money, quick money, easy money in stock by investing in scripts or shares should also contribute to the growth of the economy by paying more tax. In that way, of course, as an individual investor, I'll be very happy if dividend tax is abolished and also LTCG is taken away. But at the same time, the rich and the capable and those who can pay out of their easy money, what is wrong in that if at all dividend tax is continued in the same form and also LTCG is not withdrawn as you are expecting. And one more question is, apart from these two, what are the other area of concern, particularly in capital market, which in this coming budget?
Hello. Hello.
I'm not audible.
Hello, it's not audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. My question is, you suggested or you expected that
your first part of the question I heard it. The second part of the question.
Second part of the question is you are expecting that as STT is there, LTCG should be also withdrawn. But the argument is the capable who are able to pay on easy money in form of investment in equity market should pay more for the tax collection and meeting the government revenue. What's wrong in it? And what are the other areas you are looking at?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, let me take one at a time. See, first of all, what happened is we say that the goose that lays the golden egg should not be killed. This is one logic. You have a logic that, okay, people who can afford should pay. But then what happened is today for an investor, other options are also available. It's not only the Indian stock market. Today, there are a lot of capital is moving to Singapore, because the taxes over there is much lower. They are not subject to the STT that is prevailing here in India. So we will find a situation where a large amount of money might move out of India. So that should not happen. And coming to the logic of the dividend tax. So here in this situation, the corporates already are paying tax on the profits that they are generating. So after the generation of the profits, if the dividend is being distributed among the shareholders, so effectively that is not an income for the people, because already the income is in the hand of the company on which corporate tax has already been paid. So that is why my point is that dividend should be tax-free, because already it is a tax-paid money. For example, in a partnership firm, if the same activity is done in a partnership firm, the firm pays a tax. After that, if the money is being distributed among the partners, so the money received in the hand of the partners is not taxable. So the same logic should apply to the investors in the corporates also. The money that is being received in the hand of the investor should be tax-free. The next part that Mr. Padi was talking about is the STT. See, the STT is a tax whenever any transaction takes place. So you're paying a certain amount of tax to the government. So with the process, what happens is the total volume in the capital market will start coming down. Today, we are having Singapore Nifty, which has started taking a lot of volumes. So it's not necessary that you need to do only with NSE or BSE. Over a period of time, you will find that Indian stocks will start getting listed in other stock exchanges outside India also. When that happens, if this STT in India is on the higher side, so people will start moving out of India. That should not happen. That is my exactly the point is, you should not kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So if you start taxing all those people who can afford to pay, then what happens is those category of people will start moving out of India also. That risk factor is very, very high. That is my point. Is it clear? Hello?
Okay, and what are the other expectations in relation to capital market from this upcoming budget?
In the budget, I don't have much of a expectation because already the economy is under strains. So, maybe in the corporate taxes and all, there might be a little reduction. But for the capital market, I don't think any major changes would happen. If suppose they increase STT or if they increase short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains, then it's going to affect the capital market in a very negative way. Already the sentiment is a little bit low. If you see the total amount of money that has been withdrawn by small investors like mutual fund, they have sold about 15,700 crores just in the month of January. So if any further negative things come for the capital market, there might be a big collapse in the capital market also, because already many of the companies are not doing well. You will find that the average PE has also already shot up, unless and until the general profitability of all the corporates improves substantially. So you will find that the PE of the entire economy is going to be very, very high. In that kind of a scenario, one negative or a small negative news that comes in is going to affect the capital market in a very big way negatively. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Before closing, there is no question at all. Before closing,
sir, if permitted, I have one question to Dr. S.K. Gupta, sir. Gupta, sir, good evening.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Sir, during this COVID era, the provisions of IBC was kept on abeyance.
Yes, please.
So is it like the rigor of IBC is going to be lost in the coming years? The momentum and the kind of seriousness which was there amongst the mind of bankers as well as the borrowers will be affected for coming few years.
Sir, COVID-19 pandemic situation is a very, very special situation, which was totally unexpected, and it has hit the world, the entire humanity, in a very, very significant manner. So all the countries of the world, practically all countries, have given some kind of a bailout, have given some kind of relaxations in bankruptcy laws as well as some other laws. Similarly, Government of India thought that we should also give relief, but it is very clear that they have given relief only for those distress cases which happened after 25th of March, the day on which the lockout was imposed. So any default which arises as a consequence of COVID-19 pandemic, that is only exempted. Other cases are still on. But then filings have been disrupted, of course. But as soon as the moratorium is lifted, after 31st of March probably, because up to that the government has already extended the provisions of Section 10A. After the moratorium is lifted after March 31, I think a lot of new cases are going to come to the court and a lot of new cases are going to be filed under IBC. So, I mean, there can be two thoughts. I mean, there can be arguments on either side, but I think looking at the humanitarian aspect, it was the need of the hour to have given some kind of a relief to the corporates under COVID-19 pandemic situation, which has significantly negatively impacted some of the businesses, which many other countries have also done. That's where our government also decided to give this kind of a relief. So it's a political decision. We can only discuss, debate, argue, but we can't really undo or do anything about that because it's a decision taken by the government.
Now may I request Niyama to give formal word.
Thank you, sir. With this, we come to an end of today's session. I would like to thank our esteemed Vice Chancellor, Birla Global University, Professor Dr. P.P. Mathur, Revered Registrar, Professor Dr. B.K. Das, and Dean Birla School of Commerce, Professor Dr. Samson Maharana, for sparing their time and joining us for today's session. My heartfelt thanks also goes to the resource person of this event, CMA CS Dr. S.K. Gupta and CMA Thomas Matthews for such delightful and insightful deliberation on a much required topic for our academic purpose, for students' purpose, and for professional purposes as well. I also extend my gratitude to the dignitaries of ICAI Bhubaneswar chapter, CMA Shaktidhar Singh and CMA Mukesh Chaube for associating with our university and making this collaborative event possible. I hope this association will go a long way, benefiting all the stakeholders of both the institutions, especially the students. Lastly, but certainly not the least, I would like to thank all the participants for attending today's session. Thank you all and have a great day ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Namaskar.